Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Root to Reign, a resilient parenting podcast. I'm Abby, your host, parent coach, and fellow mom in the middle of messy motherhood right alongside you. And I bet you can't guess what I'm about to say, but I'm so excited for our topic today. We have been working this October 2025 is when I'm recording, so whenever you're listening, let it be a part of your life too. But specifically in this season, I have been working on episodes that are specifically focused on kind of the root work that has to be done when you are trying to show up and parent differently. And so as we've talked through some of the things, like last time we were talking about how you can blame your parents, you don't necessarily need to be able to take ownership of who you are now and where you're going in your parenting, but recognizing those parenting patterns come from somewhere. And this week, we are talking about boundaries, which just feels like the pièce de résistance, because boundaries has become such a buzzword. It is such a hot topic. It's something that is hugely beneficial in relationships when done really well. And I have seen it done not very well. I have seen it done kind of half-heartedly. So when I bring up boundaries, it makes a lot of sense to me that moms that I work with, that you might even be thinking, yeah, Abby, I might want to just skip this one because boundaries are difficult. Boundaries, they don't work. And that's where I'm hopeful that today we can kind of talk through what hasn't worked so that we can shift it into they will work. It just requires some different perspectives, some different techniques, and really ultimately boundaries are something that require consistency. So if you're telling me, Abby, I tried that once and it didn't work, it's not going to work for me again, that's where I'm going to gently say, hey, I totally get that it's frustrating. The first time you tried it, it didn't work for you. And as we're working on this, we might have to practice doing it a couple of times until it does stick. But the way I think about it is like building a fence. If we just put up a couple of fence posts, we're like, yeah, this fence isn't going to hold anything in. It's because we've just begun laying the foundation. We don't necessarily have all the pieces in place to actually see it come to fruition. So that's part of what I'm asking for you to do today, is to trust the process, even if you've tried before and it didn't work, or if talking about boundaries just makes your stomach do flips because you're like, what? Setting a boundary means I'm going to be mean. That means I'm pushing people away. That means there's distance between me and my teen. And I want you to hear that boundaries are actually the opposite of that. It's to help create safety and connection in relationships in a way that honors you and the other person. So that's why I love talking about boundaries, is because it can be such a helpful tool for literally any and every person. And I realize it can feel really scary. So I'm hopeful that today I can change your mind a little bit and give you some tips and tricks for how to actually implement boundaries that will stick. So let me see here. Bear with me as I pull up my notes. Yes, the first part that I wanted to dive into is kind of like, why do boundaries feel so hard? Okay, so we're going to name the tension first. Like I was saying before, if you're somebody that grew up thinking boundaries are mean and it pushes people away, that's one of the reasons it can feel hard. You're like, Abby, you're trying to help me connect with my teen more. You're helping me try to have more relationship. So when you bring up the B word, boundaries, it feels like you just dead stopped all that progress. And that's where I do want to recognize and honor, yes, there are times where boundaries can feel hard, but the reality is they're not meant to create hardship. It's not meant to create a difficult dynamic in your relationships. Now, there might be some difficult dynamics already at play, and a boundary might bring that to the surface, and it might exacerbate some feelings at first. But the reality is you are asking to be treated in a new and different way, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Just like if your teen came to you and said, hey, mom, when you're doing XYZ, it's really not helpful for me. It might sting at first to hear that, but wouldn't you prefer to have that feedback and understand, whoa, I don't want to be doing that to you. Like, I want to act and treat you in a way that is going to serve you, that is going to bring the best out of you. And so when I bring up the idea of establishing a boundary with your teen, I do realize for some of you, you're like, this feels awful. The reality is the way that you're being treated now might also feel awful. So if they're both going to feel awful, which one is more worthwhile? Feeling awful and things staying the same, feeling awful for a moment and things getting better. So thinking about that tension of boundaries can feel selfish or scary or straight up mean when you have been conditioned to believe that love means self-sacrifice. But I do want to switch that around too. And this is where, like, again, this goes into like more of the one-to-one or even like group coaching or even my membership, things that we'll get into further. So I'll try to keep it shorter and sweet today. But this idea of like having to have self-sacrificial love and meaning you can't have boundaries is not what we want to be doing. We want you to realize, hey, I matter too. I'm allowed to have boundaries. I'm allowed to ask for what I need. And that doesn't mean making your teen responsible for your wants and needs, but it does say speaking up and asking them to treat you with respect, with kindness, if they are not doing those things already. So especially if you grew up in a family where big emotions really weren't met welcome, or disagreeing with your parents even felt dangerous, or saying no was punished, you might be walking through motherhood with that default belief that love means losing yourself. That's where some of my other work is, like working on that mindset of understanding what it really means to love others and yourself well. And I'm not turning this into a whole self-love thing right now, but the idea of self-worth and seeing what you do bring to the table and see what is important, that it doesn't all just mean you have to be a doormat and deal with it. So what if the opposite was true? What if love doesn't mean losing yourself, right? What if holding your ground is what actually creates the safety that your teen is craving, even when they're acting like the opposite? But I want to take that a step further, and not just what your teen is craving, but what you are craving in relationship, probably not just with your teen, but others in your life as well. Which we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I do want to talk about in this next section that boundaries are not about control. It's not about controlling them. If somebody sets a boundary with you, it's not about controlling you. The whole idea of boundaries is to help anchor us in our values. That's why we were talking about values a couple episodes ago. It's because our values help inform our boundaries. And so that's why I really want you to get clear on what your values are, to understand where you're parenting from so that it can inform your boundaries. And so I want to shift this belief together that boundaries are not about fixing your teen. And I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but if I haven't, hear this today. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that you have to fix your teen first. In fact, that's pretty contrary to a lot of my views. And that, yes, there are things your teen definitely needs to grow in. They are teenagers, the adolescence period, where there is a lot of development that's happening rapidly. And I also don't love that we have shifted to this mindset of like, well, we got to make sure the teen's okay. We got to fix the teen. We got to focus on their attitude. We got to do all these things. There is a time and place for that. And I don't want to just give all the responsibility to the teen to fix and grow themselves. I want us as parents, moms especially, to be able to take ownership of the things that might be hard so that we can model what health looks like for our teens. Excuse me, I just bumped my elbow. Hopefully that wasn't too loud for you. But I want to think about, instead of taking it from the teen first approach, I really am from a parent down approach, that you are the leader, that you are the one that gets to set the tone, that you are also probably the one that has to start doing the hard work first, because then you get to model for your teen well, instead of the reverse, which this is no blame, no shame. I think it's kind of honestly part of how our culture has approached it. It's like your teen is struggling, get them help, push them into something, when the reality is They might need help and support, but they're going to get so much more if you are supporting yourself first, if you actually know what you are trying to do to show up for them, if you have the skills and tools in place, so that when they're getting that additional support, it's actually going to go somewhere. Anyway, that's like my small soapbox to talk about why boundaries are meant to anchor yourself, to anchor you as the leader, to anchor you as somebody that does get to be the expert as the parent in your family. Both you and your spouse or your partner or your co-parent, you get to be the experts on your children. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you be the expert of them. So, in anchoring yourself, when you're rooted in your values and you're really clear in that and grounded in your nervous system, you don't have to control everything around you. I had to bring myself back for a moment because we are talking about control. So that's where I went off on my tangent of trying to fix your teen first. Doesn't necessarily work because in some ways it might feel like you're trying to control them. And I don't know about you, but I myself do not respond super well to being controlled. And when I try to have influence in my kiddo's life, he's a feisty little one. And he's very little, right? He's not even a teenager yet, but I can see that in him even now, that he does not like to be controlled. And so as parents, I think it's a really hard and frustrating thing to have to sit with, this idea of we don't actually have as much control as we think. And I don't want that to be discouraging or frustrating or even like, boo, Abby, I'm done listening to you. If anything, hear me out. We don't have as much control as we think, but the parts that we are in control of really do matter then. That's where we get to set the tone for how we want to be treated. And if other people choose not to treat us in the ways that we've asked, then we get to set a boundary and say, hey, I can't control what you're going to say or do, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say or do. And with your teen, that might be, okay, that's fine. You do not have to listen to me, but also this is going to be the natural consequence of your actions. And it's not meant to be petty. It is just quite literally to be clear. And clear is kind and kind is clear. And a lot of my work and understanding of boundaries does come from what Brene Brown has researched and talked through and found out that boundaries really are there to help us feel like the areas we don't necessarily feel like we have a large sense of control in a lot of areas in our life. But boundaries is an area that we do over ourselves, over what we are going to tolerate and accept or not. And that in those boundaries, when we are really rooted and getting to live within the integrity of our values that inform our boundaries, we can make the most generous assumptions about people. We can make the most generous assumptions about our teens and realize that yes, there are going to be times where when you do set that boundary and it is violated, it's not necessarily a personal attack. Sometimes it might be, I will not doubt you that, but more often than not, it might be them trying to test something, and it gives us the opportunity to say, hey, I can't control you, but I'm going to reset the boundary and say, I'm not going to accept that behavior from you. And then we get to tie in all these other pieces we've been talking about with rupture and repair and being able to have a deeper connection as a result of these hard moments. So we can't control other people with our boundaries, but we can connect with them deeper. I think that's the part that I love about boundaries that sometimes feels lost or missed. A lot of times I think people hear boundaries and they're like, no contact. I know what that's like. That's not what I'm looking for. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying boundaries are there to help you establish how you want to be treated and to assert that in a way where you can receive that. So you can lead instead of reacting. And a boundary really isn't a punishment. I think for a lot of the moms I've worked with, when we talk about certain boundaries, when it comes to technology, when it comes to homework, bedtimes, even just hygiene routines, sometimes they're like, Abby, my kid is going to be so mad at me for this. But can I tell you a secret? On the flip side of all the work that I've done with teens, is though they may not love boundaries, I have heard from so many of them that they feel better knowing what is expected of them, when it is clear and consistent, that is what lights them up, even if they don't like the boundary, right? But for them, knowing what's going to happen, knowing what's coming next, that's what they are really thriving off of in their season of life. And so rest assured, boundaries might be hard, but hard doesn't mean bad. Hard might mean actually really good in this situation. In fact, not might mean, it is. That's my personal opinion, but boundaries are a really good thing. And so it's a commitment to your integrity when you're setting a boundary. And it might sound like, I'm here to talk when your tone is respectful. Or I won't continue this conversation while I'm dysregulated. See how it's not saying when you're ready, you come back, saying, I need a break. I'll come back when I'm ready. Or you're allowed to feel upset. And I'm allowed to need a pause. So there's no threats, there's no ultimatums, just rooted presence. And again, I know my little guy is still learning how to grasp language, but these are things I'm implementing with him right here, right now. Because a lot of what I do see is I think when we think about boundaries and we think about some of these things, there's a few parts that have gotten twisted, and that it doesn't mean we have to sit there and accept bad behavior, right? In the name of being mindful and respectful and cognizant of their emotions, that I tell him. He's very little where like hitting is still a thing. And I'll tell him, hey, I see that made you really angry. I'd be angry too. And we don't hit. And I know I'm getting into some different topics here, but it is that idea of I can't control him, but I'm telling him what's acceptable or not acceptable for me. And I could even take it a step further with him and give him some alternatives, give him some other options. But I'm telling him it's okay to feel what you're feeling. And also, as your mom, I'm not going to accept certain behaviors from you. And that's not being mean. That's not me punishing him. That's not me threatening or giving ultimatums or anything like that. It's just simply saying, hey, I don't appreciate being treated that way. I'm going to ask you to treat me differently instead. And even though I know with my kiddo being little, it feels different in application for you. But again, a lot of the teens that I've worked with, they have told me about that consistency, that they want to know what the limit is. They want to know what the boundary is so that they know not to cross it. Especially if they're being mindful of intentionally not crossing your boundaries, because they don't want to get in trouble, because they do want to be in relationship with you, because they want there to be peace and harmony and love and connection and all these things that they are also looking for in the relationship with you. So those are some things I just want you to be thinking about, is that you're not controlling them. They're not controlling you. And if they are controlling you right now, that's where we definitely need a boundary. But that's where a boundary can actually be super beneficial, which is literally the next section here, is what it looks like to have an actually healthy boundary. So the part that I feel like doesn't get talked about nearly as much, like when I talk about boundaries with people, there's always kind of this idea of what it is, what it isn't. And then there's kind of this like processing through of why it feels so yucky or hard. But there are times where I'm like, look, I know there's hardness to this. I know there's difficulty. And also, there's some like really good things that they might not always feel good at first. They might feel awkward. They might feel guilt-inducing. You might feel misunderstood or even lonely. But I want you to think about this, like we've talked about with other things too, is because you're trying something new. And I know that's not always the only part of what can make a boundary difficult. But when we're talking about doing something that is like healthy, it doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean it has to feel awful and awkward all the time. And again, I think people get so focused and hyper-focused on the like negative, really more like the uncomfortable aspects of it, when really setting boundaries can feel really good eventually, and they're really healthy for you if they're done well. And so I'm going to ask you to do the hard work with me of pushing through some of the discomfort, of pushing through some of those feelings, because you're doing something new. And that might be so tough. Like I mentioned, when moms are like, Abby, I tried that once and it didn't work. Like, yeah, because you did something new. I don't expect you to, goodness, I don't even have a clear example right now other than like, I wouldn't expect you to make a Michelin star meal the first time you've ever tried a new recipe. So why are you holding yourself to such high standards when it comes to these skills and tools? If it's going to take time for you to learn and master that, that's okay. But I am going to ask that you push through that and not hold yourself to a level of perfectionism that's not attainable for anybody. I know you're going to get a reminder from me at the end of the show about what we say about perfectionism around here. But I want you to think about, I'm trying something new, something brave, something different than what was perhaps modeled for you. And over time, that fruit begins to grow. So your teen learns, hey, my mom's a safe person, even when she says no. Or they learn that you mean what you say, and you don't say what you don't mean. You walk the walk, you talk the talk. You are consistent and congruent. They also learn that they don't have to manage your emotions for you. And especially if you grew up with parents like that, man, what a sigh of relief to be able to not instill that in your own children. And you begin to feel less resentment, more calm, more respect for yourself, which is one big piece I really want you to take away, and more connection. It might feel strange when you have a boundary in place to hear it's going to get you more connected. But when it's done well, when they're healthy boundaries, you can have more connection. And again, boundaries are not about distance. They're really about clarity. And again, I talk about this even more. I'm trying to be mindful of our time today, but that is going to be, actually, I think, is that my first? It's one of my first 3 workshops in my membership where we're going to be talking about boundaries. And I'm going to go into more depth as to the purpose of a boundary, why your team needs it, how to set it. But in this next section, I do want to talk about that boundaries are more like how to have these boundaries with more than just your teen. Like I mentioned earlier, that this isn't just for you and your teen. This can be for you and your spouse, your partner, your co-parent, your parents, your siblings, your coworkers, your friends. You think of it, you can do it. You can set a boundary with that person, because this isn't just about your child. Though that is the focus of what we're talking about on this podcast. The focus of my work is to help you with your child. I also think about you as a whole person, and I want you to be healthy in your relationships with your spouse, with your partner, if you do have to co-parent. And I realize those can be really tricky conversations, and that's a very telling sign of when you cannot control somebody else, but where you can have clear expectations for how you're going to be treated. And so some of these boundaries in this season of life could even look like with your spouse or partner of like, hey, why am I the only one managing this? I would like to have your help in these areas. I'd like to delegate or split up these tasks, or I don't want to feel all the pressure of this specific thing on me. Can you help me? Maybe if you do have a co-parent that, hey, I would love if you could help me be consistent in these ways so that our team can benefit from it, so that they even understand what the point of this boundary is. Maybe with extended family, they keep saying things that undermine you, so it might be a hard conversation at first, but just saying, I'm doing my best, and we're actually switching some things up. I would really appreciate it if you would honor this boundary I'm setting. And this one might be difficult, but odds are you're navigating it, and I want you to work really hard on setting boundaries with your inner critic. So the voice in your head that's saying, well, you should have handled that better. Well, you're such a failure. Well, blah, 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 blah. I want you to set a boundary and say, hey, if I wouldn't speak to somebody else that way, or if I wouldn't receive that treatment from someone else, I need to not be speaking to myself that way. So let me remind you of this. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to renegotiate the rules that you have outgrown. And you're allowed to create a home that feels safe for you too. right? I know there's a lot of pressure on moms to create a safe space and to be the safe place and all these different things. But that can be really hard if you don't feel safe for yourself. So work on setting those boundaries. Work on those areas that you need to reflect on, that you might need to establish some things in so that you can show up and be safe and continue to offer that to your teens. So boundaries are not barriers. They're invitations to my goodness. They're invitations to clarity, honesty, and trust. So last part here before we wrap up for today is I want to invite you into a reflection for yourself for how you want to be anchored in your boundaries. So if this message is resonating as we're talking about all these things about the importance of boundaries and why it's not a bad thing and why it might be hard, but why that hard is worth pushing through, here's just a gentle prompt I want you to sit with today. What is one boundary I've been avoiding? And what might shift if I honored it with grace? So just start there. There's no big speech, no hard lines. Just get clear on what boundary you might be avoiding and what it might look like if you change that. Because boundaries are simply love with a backbone. Think of that structure, right? That's all that boundaries are trying to create. They're not walls, they are roots, and you're allowed to hold steady. So, like I've mentioned, if you couldn't tell, I'm very, very excited because in the middle of navigating hard boundaries, in the messy communication and all these things that I've been reflecting on and preparing for today as I've been supporting my current clients and getting prepared, I am so excited to be able to help you with boundaries or maybe some of these other topics in my monthly membership, the Rooted Parenting Circle. So this is my monthly community for moms like you, and doors open Tuesday. I'm recording this a little early, but by the time this podcast comes out, Tuesday will be tomorrow. So tomorrow, October 28th, that is when it's opening. And this is for those moms who are doing the inner work, parenting on purpose, and craving support from people who get it. So inside the circle, you're going to find those monthly coaching calls with me and the Q&A calls, the things that you're getting stuck on, the things that you need help with, that you might need a different perspective and somebody who's going to speak to you with kindness and compassion and clarity. It's going to be me, to help you break through some of the barriers that you've put into place so that we can establish some boundaries that you might need instead. We're also going to get those weekly reflections and bi-weekly tools. Again, workshops. I think it's within one of my first 3. I think I'm touching on my boundaries workshop, which I'm so excited for because it's this conversation with even more steps, with more things that you can then take and make and turn into action. And so I want it to be helpful for you. I want it to be honest, soul nourishing community. I really, really do want this to be a safe space where you feel like you can show up in your messy middle of motherhood and get the support you need. And this is going to be intentionally a rhythm of growth that actually fits into your life. I know your life is busy. You are navigating a lot of things. So I don't want this to just be one more thing on the checklist. I really want it to be like a check-in. Go get grounded, get rooted in what you need so that you can go and be great. So again, doors are opening tomorrow, October 28th. And whether you're listening to this the day it drops or months later, the circle is always open to you. So head over to rootedinresilience.com, or you can even DM me the word circle on Instagram and I will send you the details. So you do not have to hold this all on your own. Boundaries don't need to disconnect you. They can help define you and how you want to be treated and the kind of parent you want to be. They root you in who you are so that you can parent from a place of peace, not performance. And that's why I was saying earlier, that reminder of perfectionism is I want you to think about being rooted in peace, because you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be rooted.